Welcome to Then and Now, brought to you by the UCLA Luskin Center for History and Policy. We are dedicated to studying change in order to make change, linking knowledge of the past to the quest for a better future. Every other week, we interview thought leaders, historians, researchers, and policymakers about what happened then and what that means for us now.
Welcome to Then and Now, sponsored by the Luskin Center for History and Policy at UCLA. I'm David Myers. I teach in the UCLA Department of History and direct the Luskin Center, whose goal is to bring the past into conversation with the present, and in doing so, to understand how we got where we are so that we can imagine alternative and better futures. Today is Monday, October 26th, 8 days before perhaps the most consequential presidential election in U.S. history. Never has an election induced this level of tension and anxiety, with fears not only about the outcome of the vote, but the very durability of American democracy in its wake. What should we be paying attention to at this point in time? What trends or through lines from past elections should we be noticing? There's no shortage of punditry on the topic, but I'm delighted to be hosting today two of the keenest observers of electoral politics in the country and in Los Angeles that I know of. Lynn Vavreck and Zev Yaroslavsky, who represent a great mix of perspectives drawn from the world of data-driven scholarship, as well as from the field of deeply engaged political activity. Thank you so much for joining us on Then and Now, Lynn and Zev.
Happy to be here.
Same here.
Great. So just a brief word of introduction for our two guests. Lynn Vavreck holds the Marvin Hoffenberg Professorship of American Politics and Public Policy at UCLA. She's a contributing columnist to the Upshot at the New York Times and has written or co-written 5 books, 2 of which we'll be talking about today: Identity Crisis, the 2016 Presidential Election and the Battle for the Meaning of America, and The Gamble, Choice and Chance in the 2012 Presidential Election. She's also a leader of Nationscape, one of the largest public opinion survey projects ever undertaken in this country. And Zev Yaroslavsky is the director of the Los Angeles Initiative at the Luskin School of Public Affairs at UCLA, where he is also a fellow, I'm pleased to say, of the Luskin Center for History and Policy. Zev served for nearly 20 years on the LA City Council, beginning with his stunning election at age 26 in 1975. And then in 1994, he was elected to a seat on the LA County Board of Supervisors, where he served with distinction until 2014. Since retiring from the board, Zev has been at UCLA teaching, researching, and conducting an annual quality of life survey for the LA Initiative. So our conversations on this podcast are divided into then and now, past and present. So let's start with the past. Lynn, you've studied and written books about the previous 2 presidential elections. You even dared to write a book with John Sides, The Gamble, about the 2012 election in the middle of the campaign. In that book, you developed a set of economic criteria to predict the outcome. I was hoping that you could tell us what were they, and do you think they were right?
Yeah. Well, thanks. And thanks for having us to talk about this really exciting last week of the 2020 election. In 2012, I did write this book with John Sides, who's at Vanderbilt University. And we wrote it in real time, as you said, during the campaign. And one of the reasons that we thought that we could do that is because that particular election was an election in a slowly growing economy after a global financial crisis with a popular incumbent president. And there were just some things that we know from political science and from the research looking into elections since the New Deal, and quite frankly, even before the New Deal, that are very robust predictors of election outcomes. And so we didn't develop these criteria, but we applied them in 2020 to demonstrate how the landscape or the context of a presidential election is very important to the outcome of that presidential election. And that's not to say that the candidates aren't important too. They definitely are. They're going to help voters make sense of that context. So I think of this as sort of like the campaign is a play, and the context is the stage setting. What does the stage dressing look like? Are we in a small town? Are we in a big city? The candidates get to deliver the script. But these economic indicators that almost always are important The one that I like to focus on is the change in growth, in the growth rate, so GDP or GNP change in the first month of an election, first 6 months of an election year. So from January to June of a presidential election year, if the economy is growing, the incumbent party typically wins. You would be right. Okay, so let's just say there are only two political parties. You could flip a coin and be right 50% of the time. So, but if you look at the economic indicator, you could be right 70% of the time. So you do better than a coin flip. And it structures the way that election is going to play out. Who's going to take credit for the booming economy? Who's going to distance themselves from a shrinking economy? And then who has to change the topic onto something other than the economy, which is always important to voters. And yes, I still think it's relevant. The last part of your question, I still think it's relevant.
We're going to try and trace this set of criteria, this stage that you described through 2016 up to 2020. But I want to hear from Zev. What do you remember from the 2012 election? What was decisive in your analysis of that election?
Well, I thought that, go back to 2008, 2009, when the economy was in free fall and there was a total collapse in the middle of the general election campaign of 2008. And just to refresh everybody's memory, there were concerns about whether the banks would have enough money if you went to withdraw your funds. I remember I myself had to take my campaign funds and make sure that they were segregated, under $200,000 so that they would be insured. There was a certain level of panic that was setting in, and that was the environment of the 2008 election, and it was total economic chaos and concern. So when you compare 2012 to 2008, I think most observers would say that the Obama administration did a very competent job in rescuing the economy, keeping it from falling over the cliff, salvaging General Motors and other major companies that were important to our national economy. And they had confidence in him. I think the majority of people had confidence, and the economy was growing, albeit slowly, but it was moving in the right direction. At the same time, of course, there was the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, that was being played out in 2009 and 10. And the Democrats, having basically a one-vote majority in the Senate, jammed it through because it was their only way to do it. And it created a big upheaval in more conservative parts of the country, and the Republican Party, especially. And this was the birth of the Tea Party movement, at least on everybody's radar screen. I think it was something that was building for some time, and so I think Obama, had to just be mindful of that side of the of his flank, and not to see that movement overtake him in the states that he had won and that were critical to his winning the Electoral College. He lost some states in 2012, that a couple of them, I think, Iowa and Indiana come to mind, that he had won in 2008. And there were several states where he won narrowly. I don't know if he lost. Yeah, I think he lost Iowa and Indiana, and I may be off on that. I know he lost Indiana in 2012, but there were a couple of states that he lost, and there were several that were close. It was a close election. Most people don't remember that it was a close election. It wasn't, the outcome was not free from doubt until the end. So I think that it's consistent with what Lynn is saying. And by the way, let me just say, I'm honored to be on a panel with Lynn. This is a mismatch as far as I'm concerned.
Not true.
She is one of the great experts in this area. I can bring some anecdotal view to this, but I think what I've just described is consistent with what Lynn described in her 2012 book.
Okay, well, let's then apply the wisdom from 2012, if we can, to 2016, or at least engage in a bit of a comparison. Because, Lynn, you also wrote a book on that election, which I mentioned, Identity Crisis. And there, you and your co-authors focused, if I understand correctly, less on the economic criteria, the economic stage setting that you described just a minute ago, and more on cultural factors, such as race and ethnicity, which you argue, Donald Trump knew how to exploit rather uniquely.
Yes.
And so I guess my first question is, what happened to those criteria and that wonderful model that you set up in 2012 by the time you got to 2016?
Right. So still there. So this is I love that we're working through these elections cycle by cycle. The framework is the same. So let's take a look at what's going on with the growth rate in the first 6 months of 2016. As Zev just said, 2012 had slow, modest growth, but growth. 2016 had the same. Slow, modest growth, but growth. So if you're the incumbent party, that's pretty good for you. So that suggests that Hillary Clinton ought to have been focusing and reminding people the Democratic Party is helping you recover from global financial crisis. We're still coming back. The growth, And in the beginning, she was doing that. When she announced her campaign, she did it online. She had a video. Some people may remember this, where she was walking through a neighborhood and she said, all these people are buying new houses and moving into new houses and getting new jobs because the economy is coming back. They're everyday Americans. And that was the phrase that they were working with, everyday Americans. And then at the end, she said, I'm going to try to move into a new house too and start a new job. And she declared her candidacy. That was in the beginning. Then Donald Trump came down the escalator in the moments everybody remembers, and almost immediately started refracting everything in his campaign through a lens of identity politics, whether it was race, ethnicity, religion, or gender. He did it all. And his candidacy was so unusual that as it unfolded, the Clinton campaign then became very focused not on their own everyday American people starting new jobs, look at what the Democratic Party has done for you, but in highlighting the character attributes of Trump as a candidate. I think that it's important to say, I'm sure almost anybody would have done that. So this is not saying that they should not have done this. I think anybody running against Donald Trump in 2016 would have looked at his candidacy and said, wow, we got to make hay out of the fact that this guy is and he's breaking all the rules and saying things that, candidates don't say and behaving in ways, and look at his past and look at all these, it's his portfolio was too rich not to go after. But in doing that, they lost that through line about the economy. Now, on the other side, Donald Trump understands in 2016 that he is not advantaged on the economy going into that election. His party is the party that has to refocus the election off of the economy if he's going to win. And that's what he does. He refocuses the entire election off of how the Democrats are bringing everybody back from the global financial crisis and on to what does it mean to be an American? Why are all these people who don't look like you, who don't look like Americans, who don't act like Americans, getting to cut in front of you in line? You've paid the dues, you've worked hard, you've waited your turn, and they're getting special privileges. So that's not a new message. We can go back in time and we can see that message having traction in the past. In the 1960s among white ethnics in the northeastern and midwestern parts of the country. Trump is adopting that and making it a message in 2020. And so in very much the same way that I told the story of 2012, where the Obama campaign went out there and owned the economy, the Clinton and the Romney campaign, let's just contrast that for 1 second. What did Mitt Romney do in 2012? He didn't really try to refocus the election off of the economy. He tried to persuade people into thinking that Obama promised you more growth. He hasn't delivered the growth he said he would. Therefore, he has not done his job, kick him out. A campaign that I like to call, it's the counterfactual stupid. That's very hard for people. It's the economy stupid, the Bill Clinton campaign in 92, very simple. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? It's the counterfactual is very hard for people to make sense of. In 2016, Trump doesn't do that. He doesn't say it's not as good as it should be. He says, I'm refocusing the whole thing. We're going to slice this pie on a different cutting line. And the election is going to be about something else.
So the implication is, had the Clinton campaign stayed the course and had more discipline and not been distracted, then perhaps it could have followed the pattern and trend of 2012. But I want to just raise three factors. One, that sort of undercurrent of populism, particularly white ethnic populism that you referred to as, a powerful, albeit episodic current in American life and politics. Two, Trump's unique capacities as a disruptor and a deflector, which are really almost unparalleled in our time. And three, the larger global moment, because, we could succumb to a kind of American exceptionalism or a Trumpian exceptionalism, say he was a unique disruptor. But, then think of Orban and Boris Johnson and Erdogan and Netanyahu and Kaczynski and Marine Le Pen, and you can go on. And that leads you to this sort of club of illiberal populists around the world, and Trump is one of them. So was it simply a matter of, Hillary not staying the course, or had she stayed the course? Could she have resisted this enormous convergence of factors, including a global tide?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would love for Zev to pick that up in a minute. Like, how hard is it to be a candidate in a moment like that, and not get sucked into your opponent's message and dominance? But just to answer your question, I want to say, leadership matters, and political elites and political entrepreneurs play a big role in how these elections play out. And so you are absolutely 100% right. Trump is not creating these attitudes. Anybody who's looked at any public opinion data going back for the last 60 years has seen these kinds of, let's say, pro-American attitudes. And the difference is, are elites going to come and activate those attitudes or not? And when I say activate, I mean sort of throw gasoline on the embers and make them flame and start a fire. The attitudes are there, lots, and this is true for all sorts of attitudes in America. There are groups of people that hold all kinds of attitudes. They don't become important ingredients in the vote recipe unless candidates come along and activate them and say, this election is going to be about this. And why do they do that? Lots of reasons, but one of the main ones is they think that they are closer to most voters on this than their opponent, and their opponent is stuck in a position from which they cannot move that is unpopular. And so Trump saw that there was this pool of people. In the book, we say he went hunting where the ducks are. So he saw that there was a pool of people out there with these attitudes. By the way, the same way that Mitt Romney saw them and John McCain saw them. This was not news to anybody running in a Republican primary or on a Republican ticket in the last several decades. Those prior two candidates explicitly to their consultants said, both of them running against Barack Obama, that we are not going to win by pushing on identity. We're not. And so they tried not to do that. Trump decided that that's how he wanted to win. There were 17 other people, or there were 17 people in total running for that Republican nomination in 2016. One person activated those attitudes. The other 16 ran other kinds of campaigns. So leadership matters. And just because the attitudes are there doesn't mean that they have to eventually get expressed and become features of an outcome.
Right. Okay, so Zev, yes, you're not Lynn, but you're Zev, and you got a lot of experience, and you're a student of history too. And I'm curious how you see the phenomenon of Donald Trump in 2016. What was the spark that became that conflagration?
So I'll tell you a very quick story. I'm having dinner one night at somebody's 70th birthday party, and I'm sitting next to the former COO of AIG, and it's 2015, late 2015, and I say to him, I said, I don't understand why this guy gets any traction whatsoever, and he was just starting to ascend at that point in time, Trump. And he says to me, well, don't underestimate the power of celebrity and wealth. People are fascinated by celebrity and by wealth. The life of the rich and famous, all of that stuff. And since I've never been fascinated by wealth or celebrity, that's why I'm very bad at Trivial Pursuits when it comes to television and motion pictures. I was really taken by that statement. And the more this campaign unfolded, the more I realized that no matter what the other 16 candidates were saying, and some of them were pretty conservative and trying to articulate things kind of like Trump was doing, and it just wasn't selling because he was the guy who was had a television show. He was the guy who had names on high-rise buildings and hotels and golf courses all over the place. And they're interested in him. They're fascinated by him. And in a way, unlike the present time, I hope, but at that point, there was no price to be paid. There's no apparent price to be paid if you were conservative and going with this guy who's, by the way, taking on the establishment, and everybody likes to take on the establishment. And there were a lot of cultural changes that had taken place during the Obama years, especially in his second term. We are, those of us who used to play poker, use this poker analogy. In the electoral sense, he was drawing to an inside straight, maybe even an inside straight flush. Before I was in politics, I used to play poker. It's how I put myself through college, in part. And I hit on a few inside straights. In fact, I hit on an inside straight flush once. It doesn't happen but once or twice in a lifetime, but it happens. And all the stars aligned for him. The thing that I would say about 2016 is that the Democratic candidate and the Democratic Party generally forgot how to talk to, working class America. 2 years after the election, Sherrod Brown, the senator from Ohio, Democratic senator, was up for election. He was here in Los Angeles and had a fundraiser. I asked him the question, how are you going to win a re-election in a state that Hillary Clinton lost by 8 or 9 points? And he said, diplomatically, when I go home every weekend from Washington to Ohio, I go to small town Ohio. I go to church in the small towns. I call the county commissioner and the mayor of the small towns. I make sure I'm in touch with the small towns, and I know what their frustrations and what their aspirations are. And he said then the following: until the Democratic Party learns how to talk to small town America, we'll win the next election by more than 3 million popular votes that Hillary won, but we'll lose the Electoral College maybe by more than she lost it. And that has stuck with me. And I think one of the reasons that Biden appears to be in a stronger position this time is that he has a reputation and a persona, and he's making an effort to speak to small town America, to mainstream, middle income America. And as I tell
Let's give it names, Zev. It's Scranton.
It's Scranton. It's Macomb County, Michigan. It's what used to be the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. It's white, working class, blue collar folks who have been historically part of the Democratic coalition, and somehow they were lost. Now, that doesn't mean you sell out your principles, but you've got to talk to them. People will respect you if you talk. This is my politician's experience. Even people who disagree with you, if you treat them with respect and you explain your position, and they may not even vote for you, but they may vote for you because you treated them with respect. People will reciprocate in the way you treat them. And the Democratic Party has increasingly become a party that is west of the Colorado River and east of the Hudson. And between those two rivers is a whole other country out there. And as Sherrod Brown said, we've got to know how to talk to them. And I think that was part of what happened in 2016, is the Democratic Party, for a lot of reasons. Hillary was distracted by the FBI business and the emails, and she went down that rabbit hole. Then the thing that Lynn talked about, which I won't repeat, that was a factor. But they lost their footing. And look, at the end of the day, she didn't lose by much. She lost by 70,000 votes in 3 states. Any number of things. I used to say, if I'm going to lose an election, I hope it's by a lot, because I don't want to have to replay what could I have done? If you leave it all on the field and you lose, you lose. I'm sure that till her dying day, she will replay a lot of decisions that they made or didn't make during the course of that campaign. So it's not like there was this tsunami that showed up. The tsunami was building for a long time. It goes back to Nixon. It goes to Reagan. It goes to 2009 and 10, where the Tea Party, the proximate cause of the uprising of the Tea Party was Obamacare. But in fact, there were a lot of other issues. There was race, there was gender issues, there were sexual orientation issues, there was gay marriage that came up after the 2012 election. And there was a lot of cultural changes that were being brought to bear on that area between the Hudson and the Colorado that was moving from their point of view. You can understand why they might think it's moving too far, too fast. And you put all of these and I don't believe that it was moving too far, too fast. Let me just make it clear. I'm just trying to walk a mile in their shoes. And if you want to win an election, you got to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, at least understand what's driving them. And that's what I think was missing in 2016. Now, having said that, I don't think you can divorce. This goes to your really overarching question: are we part of an international erosion of democratic institutions? I think it's hard not to at least raise the possibility that that's going on. I mean, and it's not new. I mean, look at, Adolf Hitler came to power with 33% of the vote in 1932 or 33, whatever year it was. And it didn't take him long to consolidate power, get rid of his opposition, take over the press. And look at what Donald Trump has done in 3.5 years. He has eroded, is well on his way to eroding the institutions of an independent judiciary. He has put the press on the defensive, although I think the press has held its own for the time being. He has totally incapacitated Republicans in the Congress, both in the Senate and the House. Not one of them is willing to make any meaningful parting of the ways with him. Imagine, I look at it from a historical perspective, and other authoritarians who've come to power. You get controls of the levers of communication and the levels of the judiciary, and you wake up one morning and all of a sudden you're an authoritarian regime. And I think, anyway, I do think that we are part of a larger. There's a big river flowing here, and we're in that river, and I think it's all part of the same thing. Certain assumptions that people have made in their lives are no longer relevant. People have lost jobs; they've had to be retrained for jobs that are not as fulfilling and pay less. So there's a resentment that is built up, and this is not just in the United States, but it's in Europe and in South America, and so it goes.
Right. I just want to say that principle that you articulated from your own experience of respect the voter is, of course, especially one with whom you disagree, is a model that Donald Trump has completely shattered. I mean, he's respected his base, but almost entirely disregarded, and one might even say disrespected, those with whom he doesn't agree. So I want to sort of now move to talk with you about what we learned from these two past elections. What are some of the, we have Lynn's model from 2012. It worked, but didn't work, or worked in the negative, perhaps in 2016, insofar as the party with the economic headwinds in its favor did not stay the course. We're heading to an election in a week. What do we learn, either in terms of the analytical and predictive tools of political science, or simply in terms of the pendulous swing of American politics? And here I'm particularly thinking of racial dynamics, which have been so pronounced. So, Lynn, what do you think we learned from these two case studies about which you've written books as we move into 2020?
Yeah. So 2020 is just so unusual in that the presidential race starts out one way and then gets shocked and changed and becomes a different kind of race. So what I mean by that is, let's take the model, growth rate in the first 6 months of an election year. So in January, things were looking pretty good in terms of economic growth, and where it was going to head between January and June. And in, sort of like February, Donald Trump is seeing all this Democratic primary action, all these rallies out there and all the enthusiasm on the Democratic side. And he says, I'm going to start my campaign now. So he goes out, and I think he goes down to Florida, and he literally kicks off his 2020 campaign by saying to people, I know you don't like me very much, but you're going to vote for me. You know why? I brought you this booming economy. And I heard that and I said to myself, like, oh, wow, I didn't think that he could run that kind of what I call a clarifying campaign, clarifying his role in bringing about the good economy. I thought that, his tactic is win the news cycle every day, no matter how provocative or outrageous I have to be, win the news cycle every day. And this sort of economic message I thought wasn't going to be exciting enough for him. But there he was, kicking off his campaign repeatedly on this and only on this. And I just thought, wow, that is going to make him very hard to beat. And then 6 weeks or so later, COVID happens. And all of a sudden, we have a country and a world in crisis. And all of that economic growth is gone. And in fact, what is happening to the nation's economy is unprecedented, and certainly in this short period of time, in anybody's lifetime who's going to vote in this election. So now all of a sudden, Trump goes from being the candidate whose party is advantaged on the economy, and indeed the actual incumbent, to being the candidate who has brought you the disaster. Now, as he rightly points out, he could not have seen COVID. Nobody can predict a 100-year global pandemic. Okay. But he is culpable for how government helps people deal with the crisis. And so that then becomes what he has to, he's now back to where he was in 2016. He's got to refocus the election off of the economy and his performance and onto something else. But this time it's his economy that he's trying to refocus off of. So it's different, but the same. And so where does he go? He then gets confronted with another national crisis, the killing of George Floyd on Memorial Day weekend and the protests that followed. And that plays right into his sort of songbook from 2016 about identity. And so he goes all in on refracting these messages about police and law and order through a lens of identity. I saved your neighborhoods from the unruly mob. And so then that becomes his focus, then gets super complicated when he gets COVID and all these people in the White House now have, the whole thing is difficult in that moment. And I think that's where we are. And Biden then, let's just say, now understands, he gets the nomination, COVID hit, he understands. So let's just back up even before COVID hits. What's Joe Biden talking about? He's singing those songs from 2016. This is a battle for the soul of America. We're better than this. Okay. Now, that one of the title chapters of our book, Identity Crisis on 2016, was Battle for the Soul of a Nation. John Meacham, the historian, wrote a book with similar title. Okay, so this is a thing, but Biden was set to run his whole campaign saying, we're better than this guy, which is a lot like what Hillary Clinton did in 2016. And, why you would rerun a losing campaign, I don't know. But then COVID hits, and the Biden campaign recognizes very quickly, this is a performance evaluation on Donald Trump's time in office. It's about the economy not doing well and his handling of COVID. And they go all in on that, and they have not wavered from that. So now they are running the economically focused campaign. And so the model is still working, but in these 4 years that we've talked about, the parties really shift in what role they're playing relative to the economy.
Right, but if we adopt your 6-month model, January to June, that's a loser for Trump. So he sort of makes recourse to the 2016 playbook, as you've suggested.
Yes.
Which is a winner with an increasingly small pool of people.
Yes.
Because you can't play the economy card because it's not a winner for him.
Yes.
Right?
That's right.
So he's stuck. He's sort of stuck with the old playbook, which sounds and resonates old in 2020.
Well, and I mean, I think that there could have been traction there. You know, he put the McCloskeys, the couple from St. Louis, on at the convention. And, you know, they're sitting on that couch, they're looking right down the barrel of the camera saying to Americans, this could happen to you. These groups of people, those people, them, they, the other, not us, them, they could come to your neighborhood like they came to our neighborhood. And will you be ready? Donald Trump will help you be ready. And, you know, I thought that after that, you know, that's a strong message. And there is an appetite for that. In fact, in some of those small towns that Zev was talking about a moment ago. But where that comes off the rails, I think, and when we look back at the data and the narratives and everything from this election, is going to be when the Supreme Court nomination happens, and then all of the people around Trump and his family get COVID, and now the vice president's staff.
You think those definitive or even dispositive factors?
It's just impossible at that point to continue to make the dominant conversation about how people are going to vote suburban crime and law and order and safety. It's impossible. It's like a magnet of COVID, and he's trying so hard not to make the choice about COVID. But everybody who could believe the news the day that it was reported, one person, 02, 03, the president and the first lady, and their son, and he's in the hospital, and he's on who could look away from that? It was unbelievable that it was happening. And so at that point, it's very hard to make the election about something else.
Let me add something to this on the COVID. And it occurred to me when COVID hit, I hark back to a trip I took under the auspices of the National Democratic Institute, which does democratization work in emerging democracies, excuse the expression. And I was in the Ukraine in 1993, and the woman who ran, basically was the executive administrator of the city council of Kiev, invited our delegation to her one-room apartment for dinner. And I asked her, how did you get involved in this democratization stuff? And she said, well, it all started with Chernobyl, 1986, 87. The regime was saying, everybody's going to be fine. We have it under control, nothing to worry about. And then we started to see, women who were pregnant, delivering babies that were that had deformities when they were born or died in utero. They saw kids, 6, 7, 8, 10-year-old kids getting cancer, and we realized that the regime had no credibility. And so I wouldn't fall on my sword, she said, for freedom of the press or freedom of expression or the right to protest, but don't get between me and my daughter. And she had a 13-year-old daughter. She was a single mom. I'll never forget this. It sent a chill up my spine, even now. When the COVID hit, I said, you can talk fake news and make people believe it. You can talk the economy is great and make people believe it, but you can't say this COVID thing is China's fault, or you can't say that we're, as he did the other day, 85% recovered. We're in the final lap. We're in the home stretch. Everything is fine, because everybody in America now, just like everybody in that part of the Ukraine, knew somebody who got sick, knew somebody who died. I know several people personally who have died from COVID. I know dozens and dozens of people who have had COVID, including 3 of my students in my public policy class last spring. So the credibility gap that we used to talk about with Lyndon Johnson, there is an equally powerful credibility gap with this guy. And I think one of the things that is holding him back is that, why should I believe him on the economy, or why should I believe him about the suburbs, and why should I believe him about A through Z when he's lying on something that I personally know to be a lie? And not that Walter Cronkite or Brian Williams or whoever it is saying is a lie, but I know it's a lie because my grandfather was on a ventilator for 2 weeks and died, or my aunt, blah, blah, blah. I think that is his Achilles heel. If he loses this election, I agree with Lynn that this will be his undoing. If he is undone, I'm still not convinced about the results of this election. I have sticker shock from 4 years ago, and one of the things that I would hope you ask Lynn, or I'll ask Lynn, is the one thing a poll cannot really account for is the can't quantify is the voter suppression. How many votes are going to be suppressed? What kind of assumptions do you make about that? What kind of assumptions do you make about COVID and how that's going to impact people? Yeah, a lot of people are voting by mail. That's not a surprise and it's not a shock. These may have been the same people who would have voted on election day, but for COVID. So how do we account for those kinds of things? So I'm not at all convinced. And 4 years ago, I have to say that I gave a talk on election day, and I was asked a question, who do I think was going to win that night? And I said, I think it's 50-50 pick 'em. And it was a crowd of mixed partisan affiliations, and they were all shocked. Why do you say that? I said, I say that because the trends have been narrowing in Pennsylvania. They're narrowing in Michigan. I wasn't really paying much attention to Wisconsin. I didn't think she'd win in Florida. I said, it's too close. It could go either way. And lo and behold, I'm a pessimist by design.
And now you say that because you were wrong in 2016.
Well, I say that. David, you come from Scranton. Pennsylvania, the polls in Pennsylvania, the last I saw on the Real Clear Politics average, to the extent you pay any attention to that, shows it in the 5% range. He's 5 to 6 points ahead. That was 2 weeks out, maybe a little more than 2 weeks out. I don't think Hillary was much less behind, less ahead in 2016, 2 or 2.5 weeks behind. So I'm nervous about it, and the other thing is that we can't account for, that pollsters can't really account for, is Democrats are trying to get their vote out. He's trying to get his vote out. He's trying to get people who normally don't vote to come out and vote. I saw that in Kentucky in the 2019 gubernatorial race. That governor, the incumbent Republican governor, had a 29% favorability rating. That's a lot less than Trump's favorability rating across the country. And he only lost by 1%. He should have lost by 5 or 6%. And the reason for it was that the rural voters overperformed, and the pollsters didn't get that. So, yeah, I'm nervous. But I think COVID will be his undoing if he is undone.
Okay, so I want to get to the larger question that lurks behind Zev's more focused question, which is the reliability of polls. I mean, Lynn, you're a numbers cruncher extraordinaire. We all make our way to polls many times a day in this period, and we sort of believe them, even though we felt deceived by 2016. Now, there's of course an analysis that the polls got it right. They predicted the popular election. They didn't account for the Electoral College. Okay, tell us what we should be thinking about polls. The polls seem to suggest, a very clear trend that may even yield, something akin to a landslide. What should we think about polls and their reliability based on 2016's experience?
Polling as a science and as a craft is better than it's ever been. The polling starts in the 30s and 40s, really becomes scientific in the 50s, and year on year, your election on election, the error in the polls just continues to go down as pollsters get better and better at what they're doing. So it is not right to say I should throw out the polls because they're broken. They're not broken. As you said, in 2016, the polls were very close. They predicted like a 1.3 margin for Clinton, and she got just about that. So she won by about that much. So she lost the Electoral College, as you say, and those state polls had problems. But pollsters have learned when basically you're trying to get a balance in a state on Democrats and Republicans and men and women and different religions and ethnicities. And what has started to happen over the last decade or so is education has become a more important driver of vote choice, and it interacts with some of these other things. And people tend to have different education levels in different parts of your state. So geography and education sort of mattered in 2016 in a way that hadn't happened previously. And the election was so close that getting that mix wrong within a state, you're just trying to get Republicans. Well, it turned out it mattered where in Michigan your Republicans were coming from. Because if they were coming from one part of the state, they looked different than Republicans who are in a different part of the state. Or if they had a different education level. So now pollsters understand you got to get those balances right. And so they're doing that. They've tried to correct for that. The last thing I'll say about 2020 is I'm a big believer in what is called uniform swing. So elections, there's this group of swing voters and lots of partisans are in their camps, not all of them, but a lot of them. So there's some people who genuinely make up their mind party election to election, party by party. And then there are some partisans who sometimes switch. And that makes elections swing. And then different people come in and out of the electorate too. So that's important too. But typically, all of that swing is moving in one direction or another. And so you can see from 2008 to 2012, in all but one state, Obama does worse in 2012 than he did in 2008. Why? Because 2008, global financial crisis, everybody's, all that swing is going toward the Democrats. Okay. In 2012, some of those people are coming home to Republicans. So the shine comes off of Obama a little bit. 2016 was different. The swing was not uniform. Some states moved heavily toward Clinton, California, Texas, Arizona. Other states moved heavily toward Trump, Ohio, Iowa. So now the question for everybody in 2016 was, is uniform swing over? Elections aren't going to be like that anymore. So the question is 2020, what does that look like? Well, we don't have election outcomes yet, but if we look now at polling, if you look now even at where people say they're going to vote in 2020 and where they tell us they voted in 2016, the swing is incredibly uniform across states, but also across any group of people that you want to throw at me. Men, women, suburban women, independents, independent men, independent women who live in the suburbs, independent men they're all moving at about the same rate, high single digits to low double digits away from Trump. So that suggests to me that 2020 will be one of these uniform swings. And that's why you're starting to see in some of these states, Pennsylvania, that the state is going to quote unquote flip, right? And that is not really anything other than the fact that the whole electorate is moving toward the Democrat. And for some states, that means the result was so close in 2016 that you're going to get a different one.
Okay, I want to ask a final question, and I'm going to ask you to answer it first, Lynn, and then we'll conclude with Zev, because I know you have a seminar to get to. It's actually a two-part question. Do you want to venture a prediction? And yes or either way, what do you think the enduring impact of Donald Trump will be on American political culture?
On the first point, I think Trump will get fewer votes in 2020 than he got in 2016. And so I'm going to stop short of then saying what the outcome of the election is, but I think he will get many fewer votes than he got in 2016. The second thing, his long-term impact is a little bit difficult, I think, to tell, and it depends a lot on future leaders in the Republican Party and those political entrepreneurs and elites and how they are going to move forward if he is not reelected. And so the direction of the party, I think, is a little bit unknown. And that means that his impact on the country is also, I think, a little bit unknown.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Zev, same questions. You want to venture a prediction? What do you think the enduring impact of Trump will be?
First, I want to correct something I said at the very outset. The two states that Obama lost in 12 that he didn't that he won in the 8 were North Carolina and Indiana, and in Iowa he won, but by about half of the margin that he won in 2008. Anyway, just want to make the record clear. Look, my heart and part of my mind thinks that we're on the verge of a pretty big victory for Biden. And the bigger the victory, the better it will be for the country, for the democracy, because I think there's a lot of hanky-panky that is at play as we speak and will be at play after November 3rd. And I think that Trump will stop at nothing. And in a close election, he'll have some ammunition. At least he'll think he'll have ammunition to disrupt things. So, and the bigger the margin, the more likely it is that the Democrats will also take the Senate. And that's a very important thing, because if Biden wins and the Senate is still in the hands of Mitch McConnell, we've been through that dance before, and it's not going to be a pretty picture, and it's not going to make it easy for Biden to carry out an agenda. What the lasting impact of Trump is going to be, I don't think Trump is the problem. I think Trumpism is the problem, and he didn't create Trumpism. He was the surfer who got on his surfboard and rode that wave. So if he disappears from the scene, which I don't think he is going to, even if he loses, there's a whole world out there, that 40%, 45% that are very powerful enough to silence the moderate, if there is such a thing, Republicans in the Senate. I think we're in a very perilous time, and I think if Biden wins the presidency next week, he's going to have a very, very tough road ahead. A, the economic impacts of COVID and COVID itself. B, how to bring the country back together. C, how to bring his own party back together. Let's not forget that there is a schism within the Democratic Party, which is being covered up right now, but it won't be covered up after the election. And there are issues and scores that people want to settle, and he's going to have to bring all of his experience and all of his talents to try to bring all of those disparate factors together. And the Trump right, whatever you want to call them, they're out there. He has unleashed, a latent racism and anti-Semitism and bigotry against Muslims. I mean, there is no community in this country other than middle America whites who are not a little bit less secure today than they were 4 years ago. I tell you, I feel that personally. And I think it's a reality. He has changed the nature of political discourse in this country and has made it acceptable to do things and say things that were unthinkable just 4 years ago. So I think his lasting impact is going to be significant.
Okay. Well, I look forward to following up with you after the election to see where we're at. It's been a really illuminating hour. Thank you so much, Lynn and Zev, for being with us on Then and Now. Thank you to our listeners out there. Let us know your thoughts on this episode or other episodes by emailing us at luskin@history.ucla.edu, LUSKIN center@history.ucla.edu. Special thanks to our executive producer, Maya Ferdman. Until next time, wishing you a safe and healthy day, and get out and vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us this week on Then and Now. Then and Now is brought to you by the UCLA Luskin Center for History and Policy, where we study change to make change. For more on our work, follow us on Twitter and Facebook at our handle, @LuskinHistory. Our show is produced by Maya Ferdman and David Myers, with original music by Daniel Reichman. Special thanks to the UCLA History Department for its support, and thanks to you for listening.